Hi, everyone. And hi and welcome. And Karen, I guess you are going to kick things off.
I am. Thank you, Ruth. Hello, everyone. We'll give just another minute as others are joining, and then we'll get started. All right, so it looks like we have some critical mass join. So I will kick us off and I'll say hello again. Welcome everyone to this kickoff webinar of our 2023-24 company webinar series. This one is aimed at discussing how to navigate the shifting landscape by using the accountability framework as a practical roadmap for protecting forests, ecosystems, and human rights. My name is Karen Steer. I am a program manager at the Rainforest Alliance, which serves as a secretariat, or as we call ourselves, the backbone team of the Accountability Framework Initiative. And before turning this over to Ruth Nussbaum of Proforest, who will be moderating today's session, I'd like to quickly go over some housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded. A recording will be emailed to everyone who registered, and it will also be available on the AFi website. Also, while it's always challenging to make webinars as interactive as we would like, we did design this one to be very light on presentation and very heavy on Q&A. And in addition to the questions that Ruth will ask, we have reserved the second half of the webinar to take your questions and comments. So please use the Q&A function to submit your questions. There's also a way to vote up questions and that others submit. And so we will prioritize those that are voted up, and we will attempt to respond to your questions in writing throughout the session. So please use that Q&A function. The chat function, however, has been disabled. So if you do have comments you'd like to share, please put those in the Q&A. And finally, immediately following the webinar, you will receive a survey, and we would be really grateful if you could take just a few moments right after the webinar to fill it out so that we can learn what worked well and areas of improvement for the remainder of the webinar series. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to you, Ruth.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Karen, and welcome from me as well to everyone. So my name is Ruth Nussbaum, and I am the Europe and also Global Director of Proforest. And for those of you that don't know Proforest, we are a non-profit. We're global. We work across Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, as well as Europe, North America, and focus on the practical implementation of responsible sourcing and responsible production commitments across a whole lot of agricultural commodities and forest commodities. And we do that both through direct company support, working with lots of companies right through supply chains, from producers through the processors and traders to the end users, and also through collaboration. And so we may know some of you who are here today through our direct work with companies, but also through collaboration work in landscapes, sectoral collaborations, and also often with voluntary standards and certification. And because of that work, Proforest was a founding member of AFi. We've been involved since, I think, 2016, right at the very start, because right back then we saw this huge need to build alignment and understanding and to have a common reference. And it's great to see how far it's gone. And I'm really looking forward today to discussing how we can continue to use AFi and continue to use it in an ever more effective way. So we have a great panel today. Karen already introduced herself to you, but Leah and Pete, maybe you could also introduce yourselves before we go forward.
Sure. Thanks, Ruth. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Leah Samberg. I'm a lead scientist for global policy at the Rainforest Alliance. and work with Karen to help to lead the Accountability Framework Initiative.
Hi everyone, I'm Pete Garbett. I'm Global Director for Nature and Climate at McDonald's, and I'm responsible for the development of strategies towards our commitments on net zero and eliminating deforestation in our global supply chains. I'm also a member of the private sector advisory group for AFI, as well as representing McDonald's in the Consumer Goods Forum, Forest Positive Coalition, and the GHG Protocol land-based accounting group as well.
Brilliant, thanks. So welcome to everyone. And what we wanted to do, one of the frustrations always of these webinars is that you do get to see us, but you can't see each other. And it's so what we thought was it would be really nice to have for everyone just a sense of who else is on the webinar together with you, and also a sense of what factors you think motivate company action in this shifting landscape, both metaphorical and real shifting landscapes of ethical supply chains. So we've got two polls, and we want to do them really quickly. So please just shove in an answer as quickly as possible. So the first is, what kind of organization do you represent? Are you a brand or retailer? Are you a consumer goods manufacturer or financial institution? Are you from government, an industry group? Are you NGO or civil society, a producer, a processor, a trader, a service provider, or something else? So if you can just quickly click on one of them, it will give us at least some idea of who everyone is. And when we come on to the Q&A later, if you're happy to do so, it would also be really great if you can put who you are when you ask the question, because that also gives people a sense of who else is there and gives us a chance to interact. So I'll give you another moment or two, and then maybe we could have a look at what the poll results were. Great, so we can see it's pretty mixed. Government, we will expect some very brilliant interventions from our one government participant, but really strong participation both from government companies and from civil society. So that's really great. Thanks a lot for sharing that. It's super helpful to know. So then the second question we had is, and again, this is not hugely scientific, but just to get a sense from all of you of what factors do you think, either as a company yourself or as somebody who works with companies or tries to influence companies or campaigns on companies or has to regulate companies, what factors do you think motivate company action in this sort of shifting, changing environment? And so if you can sort of put whether you strongly agree or you agree, disagree, strongly disagree, is it company commitments? Is it customer pressure? Is it investors or shareholders, the finance sector? Is it NGOs and civil society? Or is it regulatory compliance? So again, just to give you a little bit of time to fill that out, and hopefully it will give us all some sense of where we see things. And once we get up to kind of 100, 120, maybe you can share the results with us again. Will give us a kind of way to then gear some of our thinking. And again, as I was saying, as we go through the sort of the discussions that we'll have first, as you think of further questions or even comments that you want to share, if you put them in the Q&A, but maybe we can have a look at what people have come back with. So if we look at the strongly disagree and also the strongly agree, so that I think is really interesting, that regulatory compliance, that we have quite a lot of companies on the call. Regulatory compliance definitely drives change, but what we see with the others, if you look at the strongly agree and the agree, that there is all of those different things tend to have an impact on behavior. But I think again, maybe we can it would be great to share those results, because I think it's really interesting to see as well where people's perceptions are of what drives change. So thanks a lot for that. That's really helpful. Great to know roughly who we have and who we're talking to, at least in this live version. For those of you who are watching later, also, I think, interesting for you to see. So I will now hand over to Karen, who's going to kind of talk us through, as we have these company commitments, these company obligations, there is definitely a lot happening. We are all seeing that there's regulation, there's voluntary commitments, and in many ways very promising in terms of delivering on having more responsible production, responsible sourcing, but also very challenging. And so talk us through a little bit where we are with AFi and how it can provide us with a common roadmap or common guidance that helps us to deal both with the challenges and with all of these changes. So Karen, over to you.
Great, thank you, Ruth. So I am just going to give a brief overview of the Accountability Framework Initiative to help set the context for the discussion that we'll have afterwards that gets at some of what Ruth just framed up, but thought it would be helpful to give context for some of you that might not be as familiar with us. So the AFI is a collaborative effort to achieve ethical supply chains, which we define to mean commodity production, sourcing, and financial investments that are free of deforestation and the conversion of other natural ecosystems, and that fully respect human rights. Behind and leading this initiative is a coalition of more than 25 civil society organizations from around the world, as you can see here on this slide, each representing different pieces of the puzzle that need to fit together in various ways to achieve ethical supply chains. So what was the impetus for this initiative? Ruth already alluded to a little bit of it, and I'll just give a little bit more context of our origin story as I have heard it, which is that around mid-2016, the founding members of the coalition were very optimistic about the increased attention on company pledges to eliminate deforestation and human rights abuses from commodity supply chains. Yet at that time, they were already seeing and hearing key challenges being faced, namely, that there was not yet a clear and unified reference or a rule book for everyone to follow. And this lack of agreement and alignment on complex yet foundational elements was limiting advancements at the scale needed to really have meaningful impact. And so some examples of that were the lack of clarity on what a scope of the commitment should even cover, whether and how to specify cutoff dates, how to define very key terms such as deforestation, what implementation systems were needed to turn policies into practice, and then how to report on progress in a clear and standardized way. And so to accelerate progress and improve accountability, this coalition came together and was formed to define all of this. In 2019, that led to publishing the Accountability Framework, a clear and common reference for ethical supply chains that consolidated internationally recognized norms, best practice, and the expectations of market players, civil society, financial institutions, and other stakeholders all in one framework. And that story is not yet over. Since launching the framework, we have all been very busy working together and as well as individually within our respective organizations to promote and support use of this framework. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about what the Accountability Framework is. It's a set of 12 core principles, definitions, and operational guidance that serve as a roadmap for companies to use in setting, implementing, and reporting on supply chain commitments. Again, focusing very specifically on the topics of deforestation, conversion, and human rights. And when I say human rights, I mean the rights of Indigenous peoples, local communities, and workers. Central to the framework is its broad scope of application. It applies everywhere in the world and to all commodities that might be implicated on these issues, therefore allowing for a common and harmonized approach that can be used company-wide and sector-wide. It's also applicable to every actor in the supply chain, from producer to retailer, enabling the full supply chain to follow the same set of guidelines. Next slide. So I am pleased to announce that just a few weeks ago, we launched our new AFi website. It contains all sorts of new features to support usability of the framework. And part of this includes categorizing the framework's 12 core principles into 7 essential action areas. And so I'd like to now just take a few moments to walk you through each of these areas. The next slide. So we start with setting goals. So having in place clear commitments and policies to no deforestation, no conversion, and human rights. We have core principles 1 and 2 that lay out the specific elements to include in each of these commitments. And that's followed by a core principle 3 that speaks to what the commitment scope should be and the importance of having time-bound action plans for fulfilling commitments. Next slide. We then have an action area around establishing the internal systems needed to embed supply chain goals into company operations and decision-making. And the framework specifies elements such as senior leadership accountability, staff capacity building, and engagement of cross-functional teams. We then have 2 action areas related to managing for responsible production and sourcing. For downstream buyers that source from suppliers, the framework guides companies on topics related to risk assessment and traceability, to engaging and supporting suppliers to effectively cascade commitments up the supply chain, and to manage for non-compliance when necessary. Then for upstream suppliers that own or manage land, the framework provides guidelines on responsible production, including site establishment, site management, long-term protection, and remedy in cases where environmental or social harms have occurred. The next action area is about collaboration and taking action at a sectoral or landscape level to address the root causes of deforestation, conversion, and human rights abuses that companies may not be able to tackle working on their own or within their own supply chains. Next action area is monitoring and verification, and the framework provides guidelines to support companies in understanding what should be monitored and key characteristics of effective monitoring and verification systems. And then finally, we get to reporting on progress. And the reporting is to support clear and transparent communication on this progress. The framework itself is not a reporting platform, but it does provide best practice for credible reporting. And the AFi as a coalition and us as a backbone team has, and we continue to work very closely with the existing and leading assessment and reporting platforms to align on common metrics for reporting on the framework's elements. So these are the 7 action areas, which in and of themselves are fairly straightforward. And by design, you'll notice that they very much follow other existing human rights and environmental due diligence processes and frameworks out there. But what's unique about the accountability framework is all the detail that we have put behind all of each of these action areas that are found in our core principle, as well as the guidance that accompanies each of these. It really takes a lot of the guesswork out of applying each of these action areas in practice. And you can find more information on each of these, as well as resources to support their application on the AFi website. And I'll also just put a plug in for the rest of our webinar series, that we have organized that series so that each webinar will take a deeper dive into each of these action areas. And the survey that I mentioned earlier that immediately follows this webinar is going to ask you for what you would like to know related to each of these areas, so that we can tailor those webinars to your specific needs. Next slide, please. So just a little bit in terms of some of our achievements to date and our impacts. We separate use of the framework into 2 different pathways. Companies are the target audience for the framework, as they are the ones connected to commodity production, either in their own operations, their supply chains, or through financial investments. And to date, many have now directly looked at the framework as a trusted source of information, as a means to fast-track policy development processes so they can move quicker to implementation, and also as a signpost for alignment. But at the same time, industry and multi-stakeholder initiatives, standards and implementation tools, reporting and assessment platforms, policy processes, and others have also adopted elements of the framework in their standards, their guidelines, their tools, etc. And through this mainstreaming approach, the reach of the framework to companies that engage in these various initiatives has really been significantly magnified. It's also served to support alignment across this landscape of complementary initiatives. Next slide. And so all this work has now positioned the AFi Coalition and the accountability framework to support companies as they navigate new or heightened expectations. And these include investor and lending requirements, greenhouse gas emissions and climate targets, biodiversity and nature goals, and regulation, and others. And so while all these obligations bring about new challenges and uncertainties with all sorts of detail that might still need to be figured out, we feel that the accountability framework already provides a tested basis for action. We already know that addressing deforestation, conversion, and human rights abuses in a manner that is aligned with the framework will support companies in meeting these other objectives. We know it can be used right now, and that the AFi and our broad network of peers continue to collaborate on increasing alignment and complementarity within this space. And so that is the overview. Hopefully it gives us a solid foundation to build this discussion off of. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Ruth.
Brilliant, Karen. Thanks very much. And hopefully that was really clear for everyone. And so what I would like to follow up on, you ended by saying how it's being used. Of course, for companies and for many of the others who are on this call, there are some specific things out there which are really important to deliver. And Leah, coming to you, one of the most important maybe that people are really focusing on now are the science-based targets, the SBTI initiative, and also the emerging sort of science-based targets for nature as well as climate. So how do the land use change expectations, the no deforestation, the no conversion there relate to the framework? Now, we saw in the set goals that it covers those kind of areas, but how do they fit together?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ruth. So the short answer to that question is that AFi, SBTI, and SBTN all guide companies to the same goal of eliminating deforestation and conversion of all other natural ecosystems from agricultural and forestry commodity supply chains. So I think, keeping in mind that for companies in, that in the sectors that most of the companies listening today are in, eliminating deforestation and conversion is at the heart of all three of these sets of goals, which I think provides, as Karen said, a really good basis for starting each of these processes in the same place with the same set of mechanisms. So to this end, AFi, many members of our coalition have been deeply involved in the development of both the SBTI forest, land, and agriculture or flag target, as well as the SBTN land target on no conversion, in order to create this consistent set of expectations related to land use change across all these targets. So this collaboration has ensured that deforestation and ecosystem conversion are defined and measured in a standardized way across all of these targets, and makes it easier for companies to be taking the same set of actions to implement and meet each target. So there's been a very concerted effort to integrate this accounting process and this measurement process across these three targets. So SBTI flag targets require a no deforestation commitment for relevant commodities, with a target date to fulfill that commitment no later than 2025. This aligns fully with AFI's guidance on this. Achieving a flag target also requires elimination of all natural ecosystem conversion from supply chains, and this includes grasslands, woodlands, savannas, wetlands, peatlands by 2030. So meeting the flag target of no conversion by 2030 both keeps companies in line with the emissions reduction trajectories that are aligned with the 1.5 degree future, and allows companies the time to understand and address non-forest ecosystem conversion in their operations and supply chains. So similarly, the SBTN's no conversion target, a beta version of which was just released yesterday as part of the Land Hub, the version 1 targets, requires elimination of all natural ecosystem conversion, the same set of ecosystems that are described in AFI and SBTI, in line with both of these other initiatives. The target dates for those conversion targets range from 2025 to 2030, depending on the nature of both the supply chain and the ecosystems involved. So as with the SBTI flag targets, this allows companies to strive to meet their no conversion goals in line with AFI's best practice. For example, to try to achieve all those goals by 2025, as AFI recommends, but also allows a wider range of companies that may not be as far along in their nature and climate journeys to set and implement these targets over the coming years. So the goal is really to align all three of these targets to sort of start off companies with eliminating land use change in their production, in their sourcing footprints as quickly as possible. And then from there, building on all of these other expectations and requirements that stem from that sort of first set of actions. Hope that's helpful.
Great, yeah, thanks. And I mean, already beginning to refer a little bit to this thing of setting ambition, but also recognizing the kind of reality, which hopefully we will talk about a lot. Karen, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that was a very comprehensive answer. That was great. Thank you.
So maybe I could ask one more thing. In SBTI, SBTN is one of the big things that companies think about a lot. One of the other tools, which is the one that's perhaps been around for the longest, but remains very central to a lot of companies and the way they implement is certification. So how does AFI and certification kind of fit together? Perhaps you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would be happy to take that one. So it comes up a lot, and we recognize that many companies use certification as a tool to help achieve and report on their responsible sourcing. And when we look at the role of certification for this purpose, and also as a tool to fulfill the commitments within the accountability framework, we typically look at three different things. First, it has to do with the principles and criteria, the standard that looks at performance at the level of the production unit and whether it covers the accountability framework's elements on no deforestation, no conversion, and human rights. So we look at alignment with our core principles 1 and 2. The second thing that we look at is the chain of custody model that's being used and whether or not the company is purchasing certified products using a chain of custody model that either contains 100% physically certified volumes, as can be found in identity preserved or segregated models, or that provides traceability of product volumes to the point of origin, so that additional due diligence can and is being conducted on the non-certified volumes, understanding that products are often brought to market that are mixed with both certified as well as non-certified. So there needs to be a way, if they're coming to market in that way, to be able to understand the origins of those non-certified volumes for that additional due diligence. And then third, we look at the assurance mechanism. And that is what provides the assurance that the standards in the chain of custody that I just talked about are actually being appropriately followed. So when these three things are met, we do consider certification to be aligned with the framework and able to support companies in meeting commitments. Our relationship to certification goes a little bit further than that because we also look at the complementary nature that the framework can provide to certification, in the sense that the framework is really meant to be an umbrella type of a standard that a company can use company-wide, realizing that they might be sourcing both certified as well as non-certified volumes for various reasons. And so certification is good for one piece of it, but then on the non-certified parts, the framework comes in to provide that needed due diligence on those pieces. And then the accountability framework also includes all sorts of other elements that might not be found in certification, such as supplier management, traceability, et cetera. And so we really look at both alignment and complementarity when we talk about our relationship to certification.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. That was also really clear. And so in a moment, I'm going to go across to you, Pete, and get the view from inside companies, but maybe just quickly one last thing. And in the meantime, I can see we're starting to have some questions, but it would be really great if people can share them, and then we'll be able to sort of look at what you really want to know. But one final thing, your last slide when you were talking, Karen, talked about sort of reporting and working with reporting frameworks. Certainly one of the kind of quite common gripe, shall we say, that we often hear for is the number of different ways in which people are being asked to report and the different sorts of information, and it overlaps, and yet it's sort of trying and AFIs both so people can report on how they are doing, but also so that they don't have to. And I don't know, Leah or Karen, if you want to talk to that one.
Yeah, I can take that one. Thanks, Ruth. So absolutely, we're very aware that there are all sorts of requests for disclosure, requests for information that companies are receiving. And while we as AFI can't unfortunately do anything about the number of requests that you might receive, what we can do and what we have been doing for several years now is to work to align those requests, align the disclosure expectations and requirements to make sure that the same information is being asked for in the same way across these platforms. So that's something that we've been working on sort of very diligently over this time. So until recently, assessment of company performance with regard to deforestation, conversion, and human rights was really based largely on whether or not the company had relevant policies in place, or maybe whether they performed relevant risk assessments. While these policies are definitely important and we want to see them, and it's going to sort of, companies are going to continue to be assessed on them, they of course don't provide much insight into either what companies are doing to implement them or how those activities are linked to change on the ground. Right. So the AFI Coalition and many of our partners have been engaged over the past several years in a process of improving and standardizing indicators and metrics related to deforestation, conversion, and related human rights abuses in commodity supply chains. So these metrics are designed to better capture action and progress, and they're now found in disclosure platforms and standards such as CDP Forests and the GRI Agriculture Sector Standard, assessment methodologies such as Forest 500, and KPIs of industry associations such as the Consumer Goods Forum. So using these new indicators, the AFI guides companies to report on the proportion of their supply chain volumes that are deforestation and conversion free, as well as the actions being taken to address origins and suppliers for which goals might not have yet been achieved, or to maintain those goals over time, including actions that the company's taking to avoid further conversion, improve support ecosystem protection, improve traceability, engage suppliers, and assess and manage supplier compliance. We have guidance out on all these topics. We have a couple of how-to guides on reporting that describes the framework's expectations, and companies can and should include this information in public sustainability reporting. Again, the new GRI Agriculture Sector Standards includes many of these metrics. We also really encourage the use of the CDP Forest Questionnaire, which we worked really hard with CDP to align with all of these new sort of standardized indicators, in which clearly captures all this information. So we're going to continue to work hard as new expectations, new disclosure requirements come up to try to make sure that these questions and indicators regarding deforestation, conversion, human rights are standardized between them. So something we're working hard on.
Brilliant, thank you. So that was really great. Thanks, Leah and Karen, and for all of the amazing work that you do as a backbone team. But of course, I guess the reality hits when you're in the companies actually trying to use these. So Pete, maybe if we go over to you, you are having to deal in real time with all of this complexity and change. How do you find, how do you deal with that? And do you find AFI has been useful to help you do that?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, we're seeing huge numbers of both intersecting and not so intersecting expectations, obligations, reporting requirements coming from NGOs, investors, and regulators more recently. And yeah, I think AFI have played and they continue to play a really key role as a unifying body to bring together lots of those different interests and provide detailed guidance that businesses can use to initiate and continue to develop their approach. And just as AFI have been doing over the last year, we're also linking our forest strategy with our net zero strategy and with the broader nature agenda, which is beginning to take shape. But we've had a forest commitment since 2015. We prioritized 5 commodities for 2020. And we've been guided by AFI in the work to date. But we know that the expectations of us are changing, and of all businesses, all brands are changing, and we know we need to continue to evolve our approach to meet those evolving expectations. And so we're not just trying to follow guidance, we're also trying to help in the development of guidance so that it's relevant, that it's practical, and that it's appropriate. And if we find issues in terms of its implementation, that we can discuss those in a sensible way to try to find the route through for businesses to impact that positive change on the ground.
Brilliant, thank you. And I can see we are starting to get lots of questions come in. So if people can keep doing that, I have a couple more questions for you, Peter, but then it would be really good to go over to the audience. And rather than repeat questions, keep voting them up, and then we'll pick out some of those ones that have got to the top, that have got the most people that are interested in them. But I think what would be really good, just before we go over to those audience questions, Pete, what do you see? Now, there's so many different things happening. What do you see as the really big challenges that we are going to have to address in meeting all of these obligations? Because there's a lot of things happening.
Yeah, and the challenges are ones that the businesses across the world share. And I think the key one that I'd probably highlight is that just the sheer complexity of tracking and reporting the impact is huge. And the scrutiny on how companies are doing that is becoming more and more real through both regulation and litigation as well. And so we need to ensure that the focus is on the principles of positive change that we're trying to make, ensuring that the investment's been directed to positive impact on the ground, and that we're collaborating with others to have a maximum impact. And then we take a practical approach to the very real challenges of traceability in a dynamic supply chain, global supply chain, to avoid, I'm concerned about the investment being diverted to tanks, to steelwork, to logistics, rather than to communities and to the environment on the ground that we're trying to positively impact as well. And that's one of the reasons for being engaged with the private sector advisory group, so that we can try and feed back and help to shape that to the benefit of everybody here.
Brilliant, thank you. And I mean, a really important point, that complexity, and how do we make sure that resources are directed at the places where they will have the most positive impact for the outcomes. So any, just before we go over to the questions, any advice for other companies, and from what you've learned as you've been both with the advisory group and implementing things yourself?
Prioritize would be my advice. You can get pulled in lots and lots of different directions, but start by understanding your greatest impacts from your operations, your supply chain, and the wider impacts that your suppliers may be having, both on nature and on the people and the communities that you could impact as well. And then use those AFI principles and guidance to create your commitment and establish the processes that are going to demonstrate positive change. The final piece of advice, I could go on and on and on with this, but I know that we've got tight time. The other is bring people with you. So it's not always easy for other people, especially in large organizations, to see why we need to change their day-to-day activities, or to change their sourcing, or to make further investments in driving that positive change. I think the link with climate really helps to put a real financial value on the need for action, and also on the costs of inaction on some of these things as well. But bring people with you, ensure you're working with people who understand and share your aims and understand why the company is taking action.
Brilliant, thank you. Really helpful as well, that kind of practical perspective. So looking at what we're being asked here, and the different questions, what's clear is there are lots of people asking about the EU regulations that are coming in. And as we saw in that poll right at the beginning, driving company change, there is a very strong feeling that regulation does that, and that perhaps is reflected. So I think there's sort of 2 or 3 questions that are all linked together around the EUDR. I think there's a general question of how can AFI contribute to the EUDR, and then specifically, do you provide guidance on things like the geolocation requirement, which everyone is grappling with at the moment, and how does your advice, for example, on traceability link to delivering on the regulation? So I don't know who wants to kick off on that, and Leah or Karen, maybe you want to start, and Pete, if you have thoughts from your own journey on implementing EUDR, that would be great.
I can take a first stab at this, and
Brilliant.
Definitely interested to hear others' thoughts as well. So, the EUDR obviously is very front of mind for many people on these topics right now, and it's really a fantastic way to for us to see that a lot of the expectations that we've been talking about in the voluntary space for so long sort of moved into regulatory space, which is feels like a positive development in terms of clearly keeping this on the front burner for everyone. So a couple of sort of the intersections between these two. One note, as has been noted, is the geolocation piece. So AFI's guidance on traceability is very pragmatic. The guidance given by the framework is that companies need enough traceability to understand whether or not the products they're sourcing are deforestation and conversion free, and if not, to understand the nature of the non-compliance associated with those products. So in many cases, this means full traceability to the production unit, to the farm or forest of origin, so that can be monitored and ascertained, so that improvement plans can be developed to remedy non-compliance, et cetera. In other cases, this might not require that full traceability. Companies might be able to trace to a sourcing area at which assurance takes place at that level. They might use certification that meets their criteria that Karen discussed. There's other approaches that might provide sufficient assurance from the AFI's perspective that those materials meet sort of a DCF criteria. The EU, as everyone has noted, is requiring more stringent requirements for traceability to the farm level, to the production unit. And this is something that certainly lives within AFI guidance. It's more stringent, so certainly for products that are headed to the EU, there's going to be a more stringent traceability requirement than the AFI might always suggest. But our guidance still applies to that. You can use other guidance that the AFI provides on increasing supply chain traceability, supply chain mapping, supplier engagement to get to that point as well. So that's sort of how those things might intersect there. I guess one other note is that the EUDR currently is focused primarily on deforestation. Over the next year or two, they're going to be considering the inclusion of other ecosystems as well, and that's something that we're certainly working on.
Yeah.
And
great.
If I could add a few things to that. The key part of alignment is around the expectations on deforestation and the definitions and the cutoff dates associated with that. And so given that alignment, and as Leah said, the traceability expectations overlap but are not completely aligned. However, we do realize that the traceability to the point of origin is going to take time to achieve. And so companies can already now start using a progressive approach, looking at the area level, working through supplier control systems, et cetera, as they're working towards getting to that point of origin. And that's what the framework can provide, is what are those different ways to get there? And then what is best practice in doing that? The other way that the framework is supportive is with all that other stuff you need to do around getting to know your suppliers, making sure that you're engaging with them, that you're supporting them, that you have the internal management systems in place, everything else to prepare you as you work towards the more specific regulations that are in the EUDR. We see as the elements of the accountability framework being very supportive and guiding the companies in that journey towards full compliance with that law.
Brilliant. And unless you wanted to jump in, Pete, that actually segues quite well into another question that we have. But if you want to jump in first, then do.
No, go
right.
for it.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, what the next question that comes from Rocio Ortiz is and has been voted up is basically saying, even for 100% certified ingredients, we know that certification isn't enough. So how does the framework help us to go beyond certification? And of course, that links in a way to the discussion, which I'm sure everyone who's joined today knows is very, very live around the EU requirements and no, the gradual realization of some of the challenges and perhaps some of the unintended consequences of having traceability back to every single individual farmer and focusing so much time and energy on supply chain, individual supply chains, rather than sectoral work. And I think, no, with certification, the same realization that after 10 years of certification taking us quite a long way, it also felt like we in some places we'd really gone as far as we could by focusing on individual supply chains, and we needed those collaborative spaces. So how do you feel, everyone, that AFI and the approach of AFI helps to ensure really responsible sourcing as opposed to just buying volumes which are certified? Karen, do you want to come in? Or Pete, why don't you kick off?
I think for me, we take a variety of different approaches depending on the opportunities that are available in that commodity. And for something like beef, there simply wasn't any type of certification that was remotely big enough for us to be able to use. And so we set our own systems up using satellite mapping to establish our own cutoff dates, to track, to produce a whole purchase policy for beef, which involves mapping back to the farm level. I think the guidance through AFI is useful in making sure that your strategies, your documentations, your procurement policies cover the right the right aspects of that, and that any certification that you're working with also covers those aspects as well. And although we never get everything completely perfect, it provides us with that guide, that guiding star that we can kind of follow and understand, for the next iteration where we can build and strengthen the approach that we're taking.
Great, thanks, Pete. Karen.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So we definitely see the value in certification, but we really see it as one tool, as one means to an end. And companies, I think, need to be really careful about how they use that tool, and not sacrificing some of the other, activities, particularly supplier engagement, that is needed to go beyond just certification to really ensure that they are having the impact on the ground that they want. And within the AFI, what we're starting to look at more, and that's more reflected in an updated set of core principles that we recently put out, is not just looking at product volumes, but also looking at the supplier level and the performance overall of your suppliers, and what we can be doing to support those suppliers, not just in the product volumes that are being purchased, but overall in terms of whether they have the systems in place, whether they have the support in place to be able to push their expectations upstream, and they also support their suppliers all the way up to that production unit level and to the producers. And then also, in addition to suppliers, looking at what can be done at an area level. And I know that other initiatives, we work closely with CGF as well as others that are also now building actions at an area or landscape level as critical, not just as an add-on or a nice thing to do, but really as a key part of what these supply chain commitments should include. Great.
And some of the other questions, which I think are quite linked to this, but no, we now, thanks to everyone, we have lots of questions coming in. I guess we won't have time for all of them, but there's a few different questions which are really, I think, a grouping around the perspective of the producer, and particularly smaller producers, but also national government and in producing countries. Now, how does AFI support the smallholders without them having to do more deforestation because they need access to areas to farm? Or how do we support local regulation, reducing local corruption, making sure that we're strengthening local governance? Even a question saying, how can NGOs in Africa get more involved? But how does AFI and how does the framework really help, not just to those very high level kind of, what maybe there's a group of people far from the field think good looks like, but how do we make sure that it feels as if it's good for the farmers and the producers and the local governments too?
I can kick that one off.
Yeah, great.
So the AFI, as well as the accountability framework, as we've noted before, it's a global framework. It works, in all sourcing regions across all commodities, and that is very much by design. Also by design is how it can and is being contextualized in different regions. And we do that through our coalition members, as well as a network of other peers and partners that we have that are able to use the accountability framework with support from us as a backbone team where needed, to be able to take that global reference and make it applicable at a local context. We at a global level are not going to prescribe what should be happening at that local level. It's really those who are there on the ground that can use the 12 core principles and the guidance that we have to be able, to make it fit the context that they're operating in. And as part of that, we have organized regionally. We have our strongest regional representation in Southeast Asia. We have a whole secretariat there that looks at it's taken the global coalition members and looked at which one of those have local representation within the various countries in Southeast Asia. And they themselves have formed their own mini coalition to do this work that you have just described. We also do it to some extent in West and Central Africa, as well as Colombia and other parts of South America.
Brilliant, thanks. Leah, did you want to add something?
I can just add one other quick note, which is that we do have a full operational guidance document on smallholder inclusion. So we try in that piece of guidance to nuance a number of the other expectations of the framework, specifically for smallholder supply chains, to try to support inclusion rather than exclusion of smallholder producers. So this is again more guidance for buyers and for downstream companies, but it does include a bit of nuancing around requirements for traceability, requirements for engagement and support. So I think that is useful to show how we try to really promote engagement, support, inclusion, as opposed to saying, well, smallholders are difficult, we're going to exclude them from these supply chains. So that's definitely something that we try to support in that guidance. So I'd recommend that to those interested.
Great. Peter, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add. I mean, you already made the point of trying to focus on benefits to farmers as opposed to investment in infrastructure. But I mean, from a practical perspective, how does this play out for you?
Yeah, so this intersects into a few different ways. One is understanding where the product comes from. So doing that traceability and doing it at a practical level as well. So getting closer and closer and closer, and knowing you won't get straight to the producer unless you've got a very tight supply chain. You won't get straight to the producer at the first try. But actually, by knowing where that product is coming from, you can make much better decisions in terms of the impact that you're having, and then look at how the best way to invest to be able to provide a positive impact for communities, to address deforestation, but also to address some, maybe even those higher risk areas in the supply chain that aren't part of your certified supply or would be excluded through a specification. How do you get those producers up to the level at which you be able to source product from them as well? And that collaborative approach is driven by traceability, but it's not driven by a microscopic focus on traceability. It's driven by knowing the areas, the landscapes that you are likely to be sourcing from, and then investing in those landscapes.
Right. Thanks. And yeah, maybe just jumping in also from Proforest perspective, I think one of the things that for us has always been very important about AFI, and we've already alluded to it a few times, is trying to find the right balance between being rigorous but also being pragmatic. And one of the things that we talked about, the EUDR earlier, and I think there is this growing realization that regulation is very effective in driving change, which is fantastic, but there are some big potential unintended consequences around having to trace to every smallholder. And so thinking about what are we trying to achieve and how do we make sure that we are not only excluding deforestation, but we are doing that in a way which is just, people are talking much more now about a just transition in the face of climate. And we need to, I think, bring those principles in, and also to recognize that what AFI is addressing and commodity supply chains are just one lever. And I think there's several questions that relate to things like corruption and flows of money into things that damage forests or damage people. And it might be interesting to get your thoughts, but just to kick that one off, that supply chains can do so much on those things, but they can't solve those problems in isolation. That's where you need collaboration with governments. You need collaboration both nationally and locally. You need to be working together in groups of different stakeholders. And so, to what extent do you feel AFI comes under pressure or needs to be responding to the full suite of issues which lead to deforestation or lack of respect for rights? And where do you, how able do you feel to say, no, there's some things that supply chains can do, but some things that they really can't? It links, of course, to what we were talking about earlier. But I think it's interesting, and lots of you have asked those kind of questions about, how do we balance rigor against cost, and how do we deal with the fact that some of the underlying challenges are very systemic and very hard to deal with. So not an easy question to answer, but it would be good to get at least people's thoughts a little on that.
I'm happy to try to kick us off on this, but I'm sure that Leah and Karen I've got more to. So to my mind, firstly, the answer to your question starts with the risk assessment. So where are you taking action? And a risk assessment that essentially says every country in the world is at risk isn't really that useful. It needs to be focused more on, well, where do you start to take to take action? Because you can't boil the ocean on this. Then what tools have you got available to be able to achieve positive change? And we have some very real challenges in the inter-farm traceability as well. So understanding that those trading links between farms, where there's not a government system that either exists or that we can dial into, to be able to understand that traceability, to allow us to build out that traceability and understand the exposure that our supply chains might have to some of those practices. In terms of the taking action part, I've already talked about the collaboration for landscape scale activities, but I think jurisdictional collaboration is really important, especially when we're trying to look at how we lower deforestation levels and land use change values across an entire landscape. We can do the work with people who want to work with us, but it's really important that we're collaborating with national authorities to be able to focus on that element of practice change that doesn't want to engage in those initiatives.
Brilliant, thank you. And in fact, I realized that we've run through our time and we're coming to the end, but that seems a very appropriate place to end. Both what can AFI do, and then what do we need in the wider environment to do that. Lots of questions. Thanks a lot for those. And Karen, I'll hand over to you to kind of wrap up and let people know how we'll respond to the remaining questions.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't realize that an hour goes by so quickly. And I'm sorry that we have run out of time, and there's some really great questions here, and apologies that we haven't been able to answer as many in writing as we thought, or verbally as a discussion. So what we will do is look through all of these and provide written responses to as many as that we can, hopefully to all of them. And they will be included on our website along with the recording. So if you go to our website, and in a few days, you'll see the recording there. And then next to that, you will also see this set of questions and responses to them. And we really do appreciate you taking the time to ask those. And we therefore definitely want to make sure they're answered. So with that, I'm going to just say thank you to Ruth and to Pete and to Leah and to all of you for joining. Again, you will receive the webinar recording, plus check out our website soon, and it will also be there. Really grateful if you can take the post-event survey. I noticed that there were a lot of questions on UDR as well as on certification. And so both of those topics seem very ripe to have a webinar specifically focused on those, where we can dive much deeper into the nuances and intricacies of those. So we'll work on putting those out very soon. And then if you have any additional questions, if you need support in getting started, if you just want to chat, whatever, please get in touch with us. We are more than happy to help you and hold your hand as you work to apply the accountability framework. So with that, I'll just say thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your days.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.